Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Brawn Body Health and Fitness Podcast. Joining me today is my good friend Chipper Anderson. Chipper is already a legend in the strength and conditioning field in my mind. This guy knows his stuff. He has wisdom beyond his years. Highly recommend tuning in today to the full episode and hearing what Chipper has to say. We're going to discuss how Chipper, as such a young coach, is navigating the field of strength and conditioning, in my opinion, very, very well. I definitely learned a lot from this guy, and I know you will too. Enjoy. Chipper, welcome to the podcast. Super excited to work with you today, buddy.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. It's blessed to be on here. Love the show.
Thank you. For people who haven't heard of you, or maybe they haven't heard of, your work down there in Virginia, would you mind filling them in a little bit about who you are and all the amazing stuff that you're doing at such a young age?
Yeah, so for me, I'm 23. So when it comes to the strength and conditioning world, I am by far very young, but I've been blessed with people I've met along the way to get me to where I am. Down here at Virginia High Performance VHP in Virginia Beach, we work specifically with special operators, so the tactical community. With that, I couldn't think of a better population to work with and to give back to. It's a community extremely close to my heart, so extremely blessed to help these guys. Specifically, we focus on restorative strength that we've been playing around calling it, where it's mainly getting these guys out of pain and getting them ready to perform at their highest level.
Yeah, for sure. And that whole world of restorative strength is very unique and interesting. And it's something that I don't see a whole lot of younger individuals gravitating towards. Plain and simple, when I was 23 years old, I was still hitting like 1200 rep arm farm workouts in the gym. And I didn't really think much in the way of restorative strength training or longevity associated with strength training, which maybe that's part of the reason I messed up my back right now. We'll save that for another time, though. How did you get into the whole world of restorative strength training? I mean, how'd you get into this at such a young age? And, did you have that kind of like gym bro phase before that?
So, Dan, I'm gonna bring you all the way back to, kind of the roots, get you to know a little bit about my past. So with a name like Chipper, I've had to play baseball. So I've played baseball ever since I could walk. Well, when I went to University of Lynchburg, it's a D3 school. I'm a wash-up baseball player, so it wasn't too good to make it there. So I ended up going down the bodybuilding rabbit hole. So bodybuilding led to one thing and another, a few injuries, and then I started looking into the rehab perspective. Uh, Once I graduated Lynchburg, moved on to get my master's in human performance. And around that time, I moved to Virginia Beach and I was working at a PT clinic. And I know that a lot of coaches that trying to make their way into the industry can relate to this as working as a rehab tech. It is not the most fulfilling job ever. After working 8, 9 months doing that, I knew I could be doing something better with my degrees in life. So I came across Danny Foley's Instagram, and at the time, he was the head coach at Virginia High Performance. So I just shot him a DM and just said, "Hey man, this is who I am. I would love to pick your brain." One thing led to another. A phone call, a few conversations, and next thing I know, I'm sitting with Alex Oliver, the owner of Virginia High Performance, and he offered me an internship here. And it's been nothing but great since. I got brought on full time almost 2 years ago at 22. So at 22 to be in a facility like this, working with this community, it's weird how things happen, but it's also the result of spending my time and investing my time to where I want to be. So I always say, what you put your time in the most and what you invest your time in the most is what you'll become. And I think being 23 and the spot I am now is definitely a testament to that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And, you mentioned a whole lot of great points that I want to kind of review here with you. So first off, I love your point about the baseball upbringing. I feel like a lot of individuals can relate to having some type of sport upbringing. And it seems like for the majority of people, sports do not necessarily become life. I don't think the majority of people can make a full-time salary off of sporting activity, whether that be baseball, soccer, whatever sport. So I think a lot of people can relate to where you come from. And I've seen a lot of people who try the bodybuilding route, right? We live in a aesthetically dominant world. So being able to look bigger or look better or whatever that way is certainly appealing. And I can certainly see how that creates a dead end spot for people. Unfortunately, if we're constantly chasing looks, the man in the mirror is never going to be quite as jacked as you want him to be. We're our own worst enemy sometimes. However, when it comes to function, we can do a lot of really cool things in life. We can do human flag, muscle up, we can do splits. Like, people are pretty incredible at what they can do. And it sounds like, at least from your backstory, that's kind of how you got into the world of restorative. Is you started to have some issues. You started to notice, hey, all these other people are doing ridiculously cool things and they're very highly functional. And I want to be like that.
Yeah. So I got down the, again, the bodybuilding rabbit hole, and I was just eating 4,000 calories a day, squat, bench, deadlift, seeing how high I could get my numbers. And it just got to a point where I just felt sluggish, just didn't feel good. And I wanted to feel like an athlete again. So I just left that thought process in the rear view mirror probably about a year ago. And ever since, I've never felt this good performance wise. And here recently, the past probably 3 months, if you've seen on my Instagram stories, I'm playing around with some like low level gymnastic movements right now. And let me tell you, it's humbling of the positions that you can put your body in and feel that tension. I've never felt tension, stress like that in any type of movement. So it's been very eye-opening, and just like proprioceptive awareness that I'm gaining, utilizing my body movements in different positions is by far the best decision I've ever made.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I think a lot of people struggle to grasp at first too, because as you were talking there's a lot to this world. There's a whole lot of almost relearning or unlearning the past way of thinking, if that makes sense. So instead of thinking in terms of bench, squat, deadlift, instead of thinking in terms of straight hypertrophy and muscle fatigue, we have to think in more functional terms. And I hate that term functional, but I'm going to use it. It's kind of cliche, right? Strength is functional. Being muscular is functional. But so is having the ability to move however the heck you want and being resilient when you do it. And unfortunately, if we constantly train the same bench, squat, deadlift, and we constantly train the same weights, the same rep ranges over and over and over again, then we might not necessarily be able to move like we want to. We kind of have to unlock additional degrees of freedom. And it sounds like that's kind of what you're in the middle of doing right now, is kind of like in this movement vocabulary phase where you're trying to improve your own movement IQ, for lack of a better way to put it.
Yeah, exactly. I like to think I'm learning how to play again, is the way I'm looking at it. Is I'm just going out on the turf with nothing planned for the first 10, 15 minutes of my workout and just seeing what I can come up with. So here recently, I've been falling in love with some back bends. So about a year and a half ago, I tried to do a back bend and I couldn't even get my arms or my palms of my hands on the ground over top of my head. My shoulder mobility was that bad. So about 6 months ago, I started really training it. And now I can knock out a back bend whenever I want, elevate the feet. So that in itself is, showing me that the movement literacy, like, it doesn't take long. It's just consistency compounds. They always say, like, a brick a day, eventually you'll have a house. And with this gymnastic rabbit hole I'm going in right now, perspective I have, I'm really seeing a lot of benefit from it when it comes to performance.
That's amazing. Yeah. And when you say benefit in relation to performance, what kind of metrics are you looking at? Just general movement, or are you measuring like a vertical jump? What kind of things are you assessing on yourself here, Chipper?
So for me specifically right now, I'm looking at um like end range ISOs. So I'm seeing, how far I can push each joint safely, of course, but how far I can push it. And then right now I'm doing front split progression, but not just get there. I want to get there and hang out. So I'm going to get there and I'm going to hold it. And then from there, so I use um, like end range ISOs. So see if range of motion increased. But overall, I just use sprinting. So I do curve sprints a lot now. I'm incorporating at least once a week, just to move fast. It always feels good to move fast. So I always judge it just off of how good I'm feeling like when I'm sprinting. So there's no real objective measures I'm looking at. It's all based on how I feel. And I think it's something that, like, the further in the journey I go, I can try to play around with different objective stuff, objective measures like a vertical jump, something in that nature to make sure I am heading in the right direction. But when I come back to my lifts, like during my strength portion, my strength's still there, numbers are still there. So I know at least I'm not regressing. And in some cases, I do feel stronger. So I
Yeah.
think that the jury's still out on it.
Yeah, no, it's great that you bring that up because if you look back at a variety of our past podcast episodes, you'll find that a lot of us, myself included, believe there's a lost art of the subjective report, what someone is telling you. And if someone is telling you that they feel faster or lighter on their feet or better, then who are you to argue with that? That's what they're feeling. You can't argue with someone's feelings. And if someone is feeling better, then what you're doing is working. So I love that that's kind of the approach you take at things is, hey, I'm going to move and I'm going to note how I feel when I'm moving, or I'm going to move in certain patterns and notice how I do with that. And you brought up the point about objective measures, and, there's a variety of things we could do. We could do vertical jump, we could do force plates, we could do tin deck testing, all these different things. But, plain and simple, we don't have to do that in order to be objective. We could, look at a basic broad jump of, find a point that you can't jump from one end to the other of, and eventually, you'll be able to jump that distance and note how close you are over time. The closer you get, the better you're getting, obviously. So objective testing doesn't necessarily have to be all this, fancy, high-tech, high-end, expensive stuff. We can keep it pretty simple. And I think there's a lot of beauty in the simplicity, kind of like the beauty and simplicity with your training itself. I mean, you straight up said that you kind of go out there sometimes and go at it with no plan. You just kind of jump on the floor for 10 to 15 minutes and move around. And I think in a day and age where everyone feels they need a plan for everything, we've kind of lost that art or ability to just move, for lack of a better way to put it.
Yeah, of course. And then for me, it's mentally refreshing because I'm a very systematic person. I mean, I work 11, 12-hour days, so it's very grueling and it's very systematic. So just being able to pop on the floor with nothing planned is the best 10, 15 minutes of my day.
Yeah, I'd imagine that feels very freeing to kind of just be able to, as you used the term play before, and I think that's a great way to kind of nail it there. Now, I know you do a lot, and as you just mentioned, you work a lot, you put in a lot of hours, but how are you able to kind of learn more about this in addition to your work and your internship? Have there been any resources you like, or podcasts, or reading, or that sort of thing that have helped you kind of unlock this whole world of restorative strength and conditioning?
Resource wise, book wise, I gotta say I was turned to anatomy trains when I first got to VHP. And ever since then, my whole view on coaching movement has changed completely. So I would say Anatomy Trains by Tom Myers is by far one of the books that everybody needs to be familiar with. And also another super easy book to read that was my very first book that I read uh, in regards to like restorative stuff was Fascial Training by Bill Parisi. That one's a simple, easy read. It's not a textbook. It's just a book and it's written in like conversation style. So it's something that you can knock out in a week or two. And it gives you the very intro to like fascial based training, which I think is the foundation for restorative strength.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. And as we're talking, I realized we never actually defined what we mean by restorative strength training and what we mean by fascia training. So, if you had to put a definition to what restorative strength training is or what fascia-based training is, how would you kind of explain that to someone?
So I would separate the two for sure. I would do restorative based training is it goes beyond the sets and reps and it incorporates the athlete as a person and it humanizes them. And we're basically trying to repair the relationship with training and trying to improve the proprioceptive awareness. So I think that's where it kind of merges into fascial based training to where fascia is kind of this global connective tissue that connects everything from head to toe and it's sensory rich mechanoreceptors, proprioceptors. So that's where I think the two really marry together, restorative strength training and then fascial based training. That's where the proprioceptive element and feeling your body's position in space and kind of learning how to feel what your body feels, if that makes sense.
I think there's certainly a disconnect between the focus when training and actually training, or our awareness when training and our actual training. At least from what I see when I walk into, any gym that way for the most part there, the focus on the phone. So I like that. And you've brought up the term proprioception multiple times, which is essentially just awareness of our body and where our body is in space and how to control it. And that's something that I feel like is not discussed often when it comes to training, strength and conditioning, especially in exercise science programs. And when I see young strength coaches coming out, proprioception is kind of thrown to the wayside. So, how do you go about training for proprioception? And how do you go about focusing a session on proprioceptive stuff instead of just, 4 sets of leg extension to failure, blast the quads, blow up the muscle kind of thing?
Yeah, so I think proprioception training in general is just such a buzz term. It gets so just about anything you do is going to incorporate a little bit of proprioception. So I think overall the umbrella term is just very like buzzy, but I'd say the main ways that I specifically train it, I don't play around with any type of, uneven surfaces, Bosu balls. I think it's very simple to train. So first thing is just kick the shoes off. So plantar fascia in the bottom of the feet are rich in proprioceptors. So first thing is just get the shoes off and we're blessed to have this facility where we can have our shoes off for the majority of the time. So that's number one, just getting their feet on the ground and being able to feel the ground. The second one is I'd say cueing. So let's take like a split stance squat, for example. So you can tell an athlete to put one foot in front of the other and just drop center of mass straight down, back up. Technically, that's a split squat. But when you come to like the proprioceptive element, okay, it's I want you to know specifically where your big toes are in relation to each other, in relation to your body mass. So it's okay, I want you to put one foot forward, then I want you to move your opposite foot, still shoulder width apart, behind you to where you can't see it when you look straight down. Now I want you to think about melting your front foot into the ground and then stabbing your back toes into the ground. And then we always refer to the front foot. You got your tripod, ball of the big toe, ball of the pinky toe, and heel. So it gives them a mental cue of what they want to feel. And then you have stab in the ball of the big toe in the back. So I think those two cues are paired with no shoes on, just straight barefoot on the turf. Those two in general are going to do more for your proprioceptive training compared to standing, doing a single leg, plate pass through on an AirX pad.
Yeah.
So I think in general, that's, in layman's terms, like my base on how I train like proprioception, if that makes sense.
I love that. And I'm going to take this and run with it for a second. So we recently worked with Jay Cherry on the podcast. And as Jay and I were talking, we were talking about his MoboBoard that he invented. And, essentially we came to the conclusion that most people don't understand what the AirX pad or Blue Foam or Bosu is doing. We use it to challenge balance. And it does challenge balance, don't get me wrong. But what are we doing? We're challenging the visual and vestibular systems of balance. We're completely taking out proprioceptive input. Now, there's times when I want to do that. I want to see how well someone can hold their position without proprioceptive input. But I can't always do that because I need to train their neural system. I need to train their ability to feel something and react to it without them thinking. And if I constantly have them on an AirX pad or something like that, then I'm not able to do that. And I think that you mentioned before about how you worked in an outpatient PT setting. And as a PT myself, I'll kind of throw us under the bus. I don't care. I think a lot of PTs kind of forget that. I see a lot of outpatient PTs who do their whole balance program on Blue Foam because it's challenging. And it's like, okay, this is great, but we're completely forgetting to train the one thing that we don't have to think about, right? So I love your point about, the importance of understanding proprioceptive input. And I also love your point on the training and coaching side as well. I think that a lot of people misunderstand the language of coaching, the language of cueing, and we might over cue, we might under cue, or we might just not cue at all. And I think all of them are mistakes. And ultimately, we have to embrace the ability to try and explain things, try and cue, try and coach, and, be willing to suck at it for 5 minutes a day. The way you cue one person might be different than the way you cue the next person, and that's okay. I guarantee you when you look at one person and you say about the tripod foot, someone starts flexing their big toe into the ground. And it's like, no, we don't want toe flexion. We want this. And you kind of have to explain it to them. But once you kind of get that light bulb moment, it's kind of like the revolution, you're in with them.
Yeah, exactly. And like going back to the over cueing, at some point you got to let your athlete be an athlete. So I like the rule of, the first round through something. When I demonstrate the exercise, I'll point out the KPIs. Then, the first few reps, coach them up pretty heavy. And then after that, I'm going to watch how they orient themselves in the movement. Because, with our setting, the restorative side, most of our guys are coming from injuries, compounding injuries. Well, if I give somebody, let's say, for example, like an overhead PVC squat or overhead PVC squat, I'm not going to cue them on how to properly do it. I'm just going to let them do it to see how they get into that position. Because then as a coach, that's going to give me more info on, thoracic extension. What are their modes for overhead flexion? How's their dorsiflexion? Do they favor one hip? So it's, using all of our movements as also screening tools at the same time.
Yeah, no, I love that. And, as we're talking, I'm realizing that you have wisdom beyond your years. And I think I could have told you that before we even jumped on the call based on our past conversations. How do you kind of go about taking all of this that you've learned and offer it as insight and advice to other strength coaches or PTs? Because you're certainly ahead of your age, I'll say, with a lot of what you're doing and why you're doing it. And I feel like there's a disconnect right now. And certainly on the topic of, letting athletes be athletes, like I feel like everyone is chasing perfect form, when in reality, perfect form for one person looks completely different than someone else. So what kind of insight would you offer to a young coach or someone who's just starting in the field who wants to learn more about the process of cueing or understanding movement, what's good movement versus bad movement, over cueing versus under cueing, and ultimately what good exercises or good interventions exist compared to bad ones? Because kind of like we just talked about, there's a lot of people out there who think RX, balance training is the name of the game. And, unfortunately, that's not always the case. So how do you go about sifting through the weeds in strength and conditioning? And how would you offer insight to others who are trying to work and do the same?
The first one is nothing is ever an end all be all. I think once you understand that, then you're already ahead of the curve. There's not many mountains to or hills to die on in this field, if not any. So always be up to learn something new. But from that is surround yourself with individuals that aren't yes people. So it's surround yourself with people that challenge your thought process when it comes to your inner circle and learning new things. So you want people around you that are going to facilitate growth and facilitate thought processes. So like going back for me, for an example. So when my mentor, Danny, was here, he would never tell me the answer to anything. He would always ask questions that then forced me to go look into it. So when it comes to looking into other things to change your thought process or to learn something new, it's always be open to do the work yourself to learn.
It sounds like put a lot of energy and effort into things and not, be willing to settle, but also be willing to accept the fact that you're responsible for your own learning and ultimately the service that you provide to your clients.
Yeah.
Go
going
ahead.
off of the complacency part. So a wise man once told me that in this field, complacency is a killer. And I heard that probably my first few months working here. And ever since, it's been sitting on my desk ever since. It's you don't want to feel comfortable.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Your comfort zone is an absolute danger zone. And if you feel like you've got everything under control and you're doing it all and you're great, then you're not moving fast enough. I had someone make a comment earlier today. They're telling me, they're like, Dan, you're always putting in so much time and energy and effort. Like, you got in at this time, you left at this time, you're going back to do more work. And it's like, yeah, that's unfortunately what it takes. And just like you, I'm still a young guy. I don't have all the answers. I don't have everything figured out. But I can tell you right now that no one is going to outwork me in trying to figure all that stuff out. And I see the same thing with you, Chipper, is, you might not necessarily have all the answers right this second, but as you mentioned, you were kind of taught by your mentor there. You can't just rely on someone else to give you everything. Sometimes you have to have the ability to go out and find it for yourself and figure out and sort through things and determine what's good and what's not good and trial and error. And unfortunately, sometimes you have to just jump in and learn how to swim. The more experience you gain, the better you're going to become at that. You're not going to sharpen your sword without spinning a grindstone.
Yeah, and I've been seeing this quote in a lot of gyms here recently, a lot of strength coaches using, and I'm gonna go ahead and steal it. And it's failing fast. And I think that especially for young strength coaches, that's what you should live by is you learn from your mistakes. And I can tell you that the mistakes I've made, within the past handful of years is I've learned more from them compared to 5 years of undergrad, grad school.
Yeah, and that's something that I hear a lot is like, unfortunately the textbook or, this certification or whatever that way, they're not always the game changer that we make them out to be. Sometimes it's just going out there, messing up and learning from it. And, while I don't necessarily think that anything that you've done experience-wise thus far has been a mistake, I can't help but wonder if you were maybe 5 years younger and you were back in that D3 baseball stage, would you have changed your training approach or what would you have done differently if you were currently coaching, 19-year-old D3 baseball Chipper?
I would have done a lot of things different. Definitely wouldn't squat, bench, deadlift as much as I
Really?
did. And train like, train like a bodybuilder. That's what that was the thought process, and that's how we trained. I would train to be an athlete. I'd do a lot more multiplanar stuff. Looking back into it, the frontal plane stuff we did very minimal. And you think of baseball, like we should be doing a lot of frontal plane movements. So just that in general, multiplanar frontal plane movements would be, I'd incorporate a lot more. We were very sagittal based looking back to our training.
Gotcha. So incorporate a lot more multiplanar things. How would you incorporate your fascia and proprioceptive training elements into a sport like baseball, or, when you were younger that way?
Yeah, so I think baseball, like overhead athletes, a perfect example when it comes to lines of repetitive stress. So I would go more at the injury prevention route for when it comes to baseball. So you think of like a right-handed pitcher, their frontal sling, their oblique sling for right shoulder, left hip is going to be overused. So they're just laying down collagen in that one line of pull. So with that, going more towards like the fascial based approach is we'll go more towards hitting the opposite sling, and then also working on lengthening and just working on more of the properties. So when it comes to like the training properties of fascia, so training more of like the elastic properties, viscous properties, plastic, and then also like your sensory motor. So I think those would be, my big umbrellas. And then from there, that's going to be how I dictate what training modality I use.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I like how you use the term training modality there, because, there's so many different schools of thought when it comes to training out there. You could go, there's dozens of different methods. I don't care if you go West Side, or if you go 5-3-1, or you go bigger, faster, stronger, or whatever that way. Like there's so many different buzz terms. And ultimately, the best one is the right one for the right person at the right time. And, I think that's where the art of coaching comes in, as we've been talking. And, I think I really appreciate your kind of honesty and kind of admitting, like, hey, maybe where I was 5 years ago wasn't necessarily the best training approach for my sport. I can certainly say the same myself here. Is I've certainly learned to evolve and adapt over time. And I think, at least from what you've told me too, it seems like a lot of that comes from the people you work with, whether that's, on a day-to-day basis, the clients that you're serving, or the coaches that you're around.
Yeah, exactly. I'm fortunate enough to be at Virginia High Performance with some world-class coaches, Allison Trago, Hannah Day, Ian Meacham, and our new coach, Sydney Milani. So I'm fortunate enough to be surrounded by individuals that force me to grow and force those thought processes to where I'm not stagnant, to where it's always asking the whys behind something, look over. And we're fortunate enough, our gym is pretty small, so we can always, and intra-session, when athletes grabbing a water or something, kind of pop over and be like, hey, what are you looking for there? I like that pairing. What are you doing? So I think from that aspect, the tightness of our team is probably the strength that's, propelling me to where I've been.
Yeah, there's definitely so much value and so much benefit to having a good team. And that's something I've seen in other facilities that they kind of struggle with, is developing a sense of cohesiveness and a sense of teamwork. I feel like, in the strength and conditioning world, or the PT world for that matter, in some of these facilities I've seen in the past, or, on social media for that example too, there's a lot of ego out there. Everyone's got the right answer. Everyone has all the answers. They don't want help from anyone else. They don't need a team. They're going to do it all themselves. How do you go about like making sure that, like, for you in your spot as like the young guy, how do you kind of see yourself fitting into the team and creating a good team environment and team atmosphere? Because I think that's something a lot of people struggle with.
Yeah. So for one, it always goes back to what I mentioned earlier, is a beginner's mindset. Is for me, it's a little bit easier because I am still a beginner and new to the field. So it's that, but I also add like a little comedic relief when needed, because at the end of the day, we work 10, 11-hour days coaching. So at the end of the day, you need a little pick me up. And I think a lot of coaches forget that. They forget to smile more. And I think, it sounds like cliche, but I think smiling is one of your few superpowers that you do have. Is you walk in a room and you smile and you have the ability to change the temperature in the room. And I will firmly believe that, like, for the rest of my life until somebody proves me wrong. Is you walk in a room with the biggest smile out there, is you're gonna affect the temperature some way. So I think when it comes to this field and working long hours, I think if you get anything out of like this conversation, is be authentic and just smile more. Those two things by far is going to help you be a better coach.
That's why you're always such a happy guy, Chipper.
Exactly. I have to live up to the name somehow.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, and it's funny because our conversations, whether they're at 4 a.m. or 9 p.m., you are always a very upbeat, happy individual. And I give you a lot of credit for that. And I can certainly see how that would have great carryover into a team environment, being a positive outlook and offering a positive mindset and that sort of thing. And, before we close out here, I know you've gotten quite a bit of experience working in the tactical realm at this point. Has there been any like big takeaways or anything that you've found from working in the tactical realm that kind of surprised you? Or, for someone who's looking to tap into the tactical realm themselves, in the sense of like maybe they're a strength coach and they want to start serving that population more, or they want to learn more about how to work with tactical athletes, what kind of insight can you offer based on your experience thus far?
So it's a very great question. So I'd say first thing is it's a good shot to the ego. So you can have your firm programming beliefs and, hey, this is how I program. And when it comes to the tactical field, and specifically when it comes to like our program and what we do, is you don't throw it away, but it's on a very, very far back burner, because the compounding injuries that we see, they don't teach you that in the Essentials of Strength and Conditioning book. They don't teach you how to train somebody that's had L1 through S1 fused and have a cage around it. They don't teach you how to train somebody that has still eight bullet fragments in them. They don't teach you how to train somebody that is like barely able to walk due to the compounding injuries. So I've heard it a few times from former coaches here, is we're problem solvers. And I think not just for the tactical community, but I think strength coaches in general need to remember why we do what we do. We are problem solvers. There's always a problem for us to solve. When it's restorative strength, it's restoring that injury and getting them functioning again. But when you think performance wise, what is the problem? The problem is you want to perform better, and ultimately you want to win. So the problem is you want to win. So walk back, you have to solve that problem. So I think if we remember that the big block is problem solving, then from there it makes our decision process a little bit easier.
Yeah, I love that. Focus on the end goal. And if you have your end goal in mind, then you just become, the guy who reverse engineers a plan to get there. That's exactly how I approach my physical therapy work. And that's not a secret. I'll tell that to anyone any day. And I think that seems to be how you approach your day-to-day as a strength coach as well, is, you have your end goal in mind that's specific to your client. And it doesn't necessarily matter where that client's coming from, what their background is, or what they've been through. You know where they need to get to, and it's your job to figure out how to get them there. Where are they now? Where do they want to be? Let's build a progression to get there. And maybe that follows a, exact same progression as someone else, or maybe it's a whole new path. But guess what? You're going to put in the work and put in the hours and make sure they get there.
Yeah, and especially with the tactical community, it's really been eye-opening for flexibility. So it's being able to, when an athlete walks in and you have your program programmed out and you're like, hey, like today we're gonna hit like 5x5, whatever it is. They come in, they're like, hey man, like I was working all night last night. I haven't been to sleep yet. I came straight here from work. So then you have to think on your feet. You're like, oh, what are we going to do? So you have to be able to make a 90-degree turn right then and there. So it's always having, plan A, B, C, D, because you never know intra-session what's going to flare up. When you're dealing with these compounding injuries, there's always a chance that mid-session something's going to be aggravated.
And that's what differentiates a good coach from a great coach, in my opinion, is good coaches make a plan and stick to the plan. Great coaches make a plan, implement the plan, and then adapt the plan as it needs to as you go about it. Unfortunately, no plan ever goes 100% like we expect it to. And that's why I'm slightly opposed to periodization, which that's a whole podcast in itself. But the art of coaching really comes in from your ability to understand where they need to be, where they are now, filling in the plan to get there, and then adapting the plan either steps ahead or steps behind at a moment's notice whenever it's needed. And I certainly see how that would be very applicable to this population in this sense.
Yeah, exactly. I always say, like, when it comes to this population, you really learn the minimal effective dose, because when you think about it, it's always more is better, and they're very task oriented. So it's kind of, you almost have to trick them in a sense to do less. So one thing I've been playing around with actually is, getting to that task oriented with the tactical field is like 1.5 reps. So a lot of times you give an athlete, hey, let's do 8 reps here. They're just going to bang them out as fast as they can. Even if you tell them to do like 3-second eccentric, you can tell them to do that all you want. All they see is that 8, and they're going to get that 8 no matter no matter the cost. So what I like to say is we're going to do like 1.5 reps and keep intention the whole time. So what that does, and we're going to do it for time. So I'll have their time. So generally, and I'm timing, counting, whatever, but it's to make them focus on the tension aspect of the movement compared to the number. And I've seen, just movement quality wise, that's been the best cue per se compared to anything I've done yet.
I like that. I like that a lot. That's great advice, Chipper. As we start to wrap up here, I know we've kind of talked about so many different things thus far. Do you have any kind of closing thoughts or closing remarks or anything that you want people listening to really take away from today, Chipper?
Yeah, I'd say the main thing is, for younger coaches out there, is don't be afraid to reach out to people. Use social media as a tool. For me, social media literally changed my life. 3 sentences changed the course of my career. So for young coaches, I can't stress enough, is utilize social media as a tool, as 1. 2, invest your time. So invest your time driving to work, whatever your free time is, invest it. Read, listen to a podcast, fill your time with something that's going to better you for your future. 3 is just be yourself, be authentic. Don't try to act all high and mighty. I have the privilege to work with some basically walking lie detectors when it comes to spec ops guys. So I've really learned fast to be authentic. And when it comes to just normal everyday people, they can see through the mask. So just don't even put a mask up and be authentic, and that's going to get you where you need to go. And the lastly is, this career is very grueling, and it costs, and then you have to invest a lot of time, 50, 60-hour work weeks. And it's go about your career and remember what life-changing changes you'll make on athletes' lives. Is we're coaches, we're PTs, we single-handedly have an effect on our athlete's life. And I don't take that lightly, and I don't think any of us should take that lightly. And I think we should always remember the whys behind what we're doing. So whenever at the end of the week, it's a 60-hour work week and that, Saturday evening comes and you're just swamped, is take time, decompress, remember the why you do it, and then find time and find things that help you decompress, unwind. If it's going to the beach, if it's just, sitting at a coffee shop reading, find time to decompress. I can't stress that enough. You always hear that term burnout, especially young coaches that invest a lot of time like we do, is you're going to hear that from like the corners of the room is you're going too fast, you're going to burn out. So that would be my advice, is to find stuff that fills your gas tank in your free time.
I love all those points, Chipper, and I'm going to kind of add to each one a little bit here. First off, I love your point on social media. Now, I want to make sure we share your Instagram handle, because I'm sure somebody listening is going to reach out to you. I think it would be a very wise move if they do. I think a lot of connections come from social media, and I've certainly made a lot myself through the power of Instagram, and I meet new people every day because of Instagram. So I love your point on that and completely echo that. I definitely echo your point about being authentic, especially in today's day and age. If you're not being real, people are going to find out one way or the other. And if you are being real, and maybe things change over time, maybe your thoughts about something changes, maybe your opinions change, that's okay. You're allowed to have changes. Just be authentic about it. Own the fact that, hey, this is how I used to think, and this is how I think now, right? I'll admit that at one time on the podcast, if you go back a while ago, you'll see that I did no training with any kind of machine, and now I do a lot of machine training. So it's okay to evolve and shift. Just own it and admit it, and accept it. Accept that you were once a certain way and you're now a different way. With that in mind too, I love your point on just being willing to put in the time and put in the hours. Nothing worth having comes easy, I like to say. And that's especially true in the strength and conditioning world is, if you're trying to work with the best of the best or be at the top of your game, being the 1%, you have to do what the 1% does. And unfortunately, the 1% doesn't put in a 20 to 30 hour work week or stop at the end of an 8-hour day and check out and, all done. They continue to grind and push forward and move ahead. Now, that doesn't mean that every coach ever needs to do that. It's okay to, not put in a 100-hour work week every week. It's okay to not have to do that. But by the same token, you have to accept this is what I want to be, and this is what I'm going to have to do in order to get there. And either I'm going to do it or not do it. Before we leave, that Instagram handle, Chipper, where can people find you at?
They can find me. It's just my name. It's chipper.anderson on Instagram. And that's pretty much the only one I really use. I have a Twitter, but I don't really post on Twitter.
You haven't joined me in my quest to bring MySpace back this year in 2023 yet?
Dude, I probably wasn't even old enough to have a MySpace.
Oh man, that's funny. But no, we'll link to your Instagram handle in the description there, so that way if anyone missed it, they can reach out to you. Chipper, it's always a pleasure chatting with you and sharing all of your knowledge and insight and experience. I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Dan. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Brawn Body Health and Fitness Podcast. If you liked this episode, please make sure to share it with a friend, subscribe so you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes, and leave a review. This way we can spread knowledge and motivation and help reach more people. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time.